Hello. I think that this is hopefully working. You can hear me. We're telling. I'm also running this on Instagram right now, so I'll be looking down to both of these. And right now, Instagram is saying we're alerting all your followers. You're starting a video. Hello YouTube. Hello people watching this later on YouTube. Welcome to the Ask an Astronomer on June 18th of 2020. I've been gone for a couple weeks. My name is Kevin Hainline. I'm an astronomer at the University of Arizona. And normally in these videos, if you've watched on YouTube, I've got like a green screen behind me. And I don't really do this on Instagram because I can't work with the green screen. It's weird, by the way. This is my left eye, and it's strange that Instagram likes to flip these things. I think it's absurd that Instagram does that. But I'm doing this live on YouTube and on Instagram right now. I sit in front of a green screen normally, and I fly around the universe and talk about astronomy. And I've taken a break for the last couple weeks because I wanted to focus myself on stuff that's a little more important than just zooming around the universe. Specifically, I've been really thinking a lot about the role of police in the wake of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many black people who've been murdered by police for years and years and years. These things are very important to pay attention to. And specifically, last Wednesday, there was a call from black scientists and allies to stop STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math education, and go on strike for a day to address systematic racism within institutes of astronomy throughout the country. I joined with Steward Observatory, where I work, to explore how Steward can create plans of action that can deal with both the lack of black scientists in our department and also how we can make the department better for future black scientists. And so to that end, I thought that I would come back and do an Ask an Astronomer like I've done for the last couple months while we've been in quarantine. But this time I talk about my journey to becoming an astronomer. I wrote this all down, so if it looks like I'm reading, I'm trying to read because I can ramble forever, and I want to make sure that this gets to the points that I want to make. I want to talk about my own journey to becoming an astronomer, but I want to make it very clear from the outset. What I experienced, resistance in my career, is nothing compared with the struggle that black scientists and other people of color, marginalized folks, have had to get to positions of power within academia. It's nothing. I've experienced some struggle, but it's not a struggle compared to the struggle that I'll discuss, that I think is, like a tip of the iceberg, what I'll discuss from what actually is going on. What I really wanted to talk about was the pathway to being, how the pathway to being a scientist is built and made to be much easier for white men like me. Period. Full stop. That's what I wanted to talk about today. And if that's not exciting to you, you can come back in the future and I'll zoom around the universe. But I really want to make sure that I address this, on the record, in a place where YouTube will save it, and in front of people who follow me and are excited and want to listen to someone yammer on about astronomy. I'll yammer on about how I became an astronomer and talk about how how it was easier because I'm a white man. And I think that this process needs to change. And if you're watching this live, you can also ask questions. On YouTube or on Instagram, you can ask questions, and hopefully I'll get to them and answer them as well. But if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, hi, you could have asked questions. Watch in the future, ask questions then. I try to do this every other week, and I'll try to keep on that schedule after this. So let's get started. All right. So I grew up in Southern California, in Orange County, California, and I always wanted to be an astronomer. That's just the thing I wanted to do when I was a kid. Space or dinosaurs. Those were the only things I could think about studying. By the way, if you aren't familiar, this is Jesus Louisiana back here. She's a little annoyed because I've closed these blinds so that it's not super bright behind me, but she might get a little frustrated and leave halfway through, but she's a wonderful little cat. Anyway, what I've noticed about my love for astronomy is it's not unique. In fact, people all around the world, I've traveled all around the world, and I've talked with people of different ethnicities and gender expressions and different places economically, and they all generally express a love for astronomy. I hear it from all over the world. And I think that this is like the foundational statement I want to make right off the bat, which is that astronomy, by virtue of being the first science, by virtue of being a science that was accessible to people around the world, is a science that belongs to humanity. We have evidence that ancient cultures around the planet had some form of astronomical observations that were linked to the core of who they were as a people. We can see this in Egypt. We can see this in Africa. We can see this in Asia, India. We can see the native populations in Australia, native populations here in America, in the Southern Hemisphere as well. It's just a worldwide thing. And I wanted to say that as a result, I don't think, and it's not even a thing about thinking. Like race, class, gender identity expression, it doesn't affect a love for astronomy. People of all types and kinds love astronomy. They love it and want to be astronomers. People of every diverse population on the planet have inside of them a love for astronomy, and many of them have a drive to become astronomers. It's not just a thing that's for white people. And if that's true, then that would mean, if that's a true statement, if all around the world, that if you were to look at astronomers, they should be as diverse as the world. And that's not the case. They're white. Most astronomers are white, generally white men like myself. And so there's something that must be happening between a childhood love of astronomy and eventually landing in academia that benefits white astronomers over others. Racism. That's the point of this. And this is, I'm going to try to be as enthusiastic as I am, knowing that this is also a thing that's about racism. So when I was in high school and I was looking at undergraduate physics departments and I was looking at astronomy careers, I, as a result, could see people like me in photographs of faculty. And I never had to think about whether or not it made sense for me, a white male, to be an astronomer. Because like every famous astronomer at the time that I could think of was a white man. In fact, for most people watching this, if I were to ask you to name 10 famous astronomers, you most likely name predominantly white men, historically. People like Copernicus, Galileo, Hubble, Carl Sagan. You might say someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and that's great, that in the last decade to 2 decades, there have been some astronomers of color that have become more famous. And I think that if you were to go now, and there might be astronomy nerds in my audience, you should go and there are many, you probably know of many more. I'll be talking about Jedidah Eisler at the end of this, and her TED Talk I'll plug and put in the chat on YouTube. But hi everybody. But please, recognize at the beginning, recognize that the history of astronomy is a history of white, generally male astronomers. Only the last couple hundred years have women even been really starting to make been allowed to even do astronomy research. And so the pathway to becoming an astronomer, the path between having a love for astronomer and being in astronomy, goes through academia. That's, outside of rare instances, the pathway the vast majority of astronomers, they went to a 4-year college and got a physics or astronomy degree, and then went to graduate school for a PhD. And there are some astronomers with different undergraduate degrees. Generally, a PhD is the goal of an astronomer in training. That's what you do. You go and you get a PhD. Thanks. I appreciate it, Nikki. That's very nice of you to say. The problem is, at the very beginning, this entire process is expensive. Not just expensive monetarily, fiscally, as I'll talk about in a second, but emotionally. And I'll talk about that a lot as well, right? It's not I'm not the smartest person in the world at all. I'm lower down. I've met many smart people, but this is a hard thing. It's hard, just like it's hard to do a lot of things. But the act of being an astronomer and any scientist, it can be very difficult and challenging. And when it's difficult for me, and I have all the privileges in the world, I can't even imagine what it would be like. And we'll talk about some of the privileges as we go through this. So let's start about financially. My parents never went to college. My father wasn't able to because of financial reasons, and so he made a vow that his children, I have a younger brother, would never have to worry about that. And so we were imbued with a confidence as we were young that somehow we'd find money to go to college, and that's a huge privilege to have. I don't think that's what happens to all people in the world. In fact, I think a lot of people, they hit the college point and their parents just are like, we can't afford it, and then that's a bummer, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I had to, my parents helped, but then I had to take out huge loans that I'm still actually just paying off to be able to go to attend college. And the thing is that the privilege to attend college is based on economic status and also based on the traditions in the family, whether or not college is something that's important. And that's going to just drive out a huge number of qualified candidates who can't afford to even apply for college because it costs money to apply for college, much less attend college. And the thing is I recognize that there are scholarships and ways to have fee waivers and things, but knowing about these requires support while you're in high school. And high school education is supremely broken. It is supremely broken in this country, especially in the last 20 years, as high schools and with charter schools as well have switched to a mode of saying that the way to show you're succeeding in high school is by doing well on tests. If teachers get their students to do well on tests and the students do great on tests, then guess what? They're successful. And you know what? How many of you watching right now are terrible at tests? I'm awful at tests. I do bad on tests all the time. And if you are a teacher and you've got a class full of students and the metric by which your success is being measured is that your students do well on tests, it's within your best interest to try to remove students from your class that are struggling for legitimate reasons because they're not good at tests, right? And the thing is that tests are already biased to begin with. Tests are not a great metric of demonstrating efficiency and efficacy at a subject. Tests are terrible at that. Like, the SATs are biased, especially against people of color, minorities, marginalized people, women, right? There's a study that if you even just tell a group of students, actually, you women or black students, you do worse on this test than white students, they'll just do worse on it. Even than students if you don't just say that phrase to them. That's insane. And these tests are biased and they're what are used to just demonstrate efficacy in high school. And so I think tests can be a metric of understanding, but I think that they're just mostly an easy to implement metric of understanding. There's something where you can easily just assign a test and people publish tests and you just take that test or write that test, assign the test, and then just score the test and you don't have to worry about the fact that your students might not be learning in the way that you're teaching them. And that's a bummer because what it means is that teachers have to, do more to work with the students and what the students know. And that is incredibly difficult, especially because financially, people don't support teachers. Teachers aren't supported financially. School districts aren't supported financially, especially if the way that they get money is by having kids do better on tests, right? So it's like this incredible loop where, if you want to do better with students, you have to work harder and you have to be supported financially as a school. But the only way you get that is if you train your kids to do better on dumb tests that don't actually measure anything. And then suddenly you're going, it's BS, right? And so what happens is that if you want to go to college and be considered for college admittance, you need to have the grades, right? And so you're already at a disadvantage if your classes are not working with you, right? And so you lose students who are talented and intelligent and excited about astronomy, but they're just in a school district that doesn't value them for those reasons. They value them for their ability to take tests. And so maybe the district also has overeager police. And so there's a lot to be said about the role of the fact that we put police in classes to protect students, but instead police end up arresting students and putting them into the criminal justice system, which is just, it's garbage. So when I applied to college in high school, and again, I wasn't like the top of my class. I wasn't even anywhere close. I was rejected from all the colleges I applied to, completely rejected. Right. And so what I did was I did what many people do in this situation was I just started working jobs to help pay for 18-year-old Kevin. I worked at a board game store and a video game store. And I also went to a nearby community college. Community colleges get a lot of crap from people sometimes because they think, oh, well, okay, there's college and there's community college. There was an entire TV show that was like, look at how wacky community college is. But community college is actually a place that is filled with students, in my experience, filled with students who want to learn, even while they're doing things like raising kids, while they're working jobs, while they're taking care of their family. They want to learn. They want to get this education. And so it's not like as a person who's taught at college levels, at Ivy League college levels, the amount of hard work I saw students doing at a community college versus the hard work at students at Ivy Leagues where they're like, well, I deserve to be here. This is what I should get. It's so different. It's so different. And so I went to San Diego Community College. I was there for a year, and I took my first astronomy course as a person there. From a PhD astronomer, they had a planetarium there. It was incredible. I'm very, very proud of my time at Santa Ana College. Another notable alumni of Santa Ana College, Will Farrell. Thank you very much. Santa Ana, the town that I lived in for most of my life growing up, has an 18% poverty rate. And so having cheaper college resources is pretty key, especially because Santa Ana College has incredible good fee assistance for low-income students, right? And so these sorts of things are great, and they act as feeders to take students who might not be able to initially demonstrate because of whatever reason that, that ready to jump through the dumb hoops that colleges put in front of them to demonstrate efficacy in the subject, community colleges allow for that, right? Which is great. So after a year at SAC, I reapplied to certain colleges, and I got into one. I got into a college called Harvey Mudd College, and I accepted. Harvey Mudd is a science and technical school outside of Los Angeles. It's where I really wanted to go, and it's very, very selective and incredibly expensive. Right now, if you Google most expensive college, Harvey Mudd comes up, which is insane to me because, again, my family is not particularly wealthy, which is evidenced by the fact that I am and will continue to be paying off loans into the future. But it has good financial support packages, but that assumes you can get in and that you can get scholarships and fellowships. So I want to stop here and talk a second about the application process for selecting college students, because this is a point where I think racism plays a big part in also preventing diverse students from getting into colleges. College admissions processes are biased against marginalized students. What are the factors that admissions officers use to determine whether they accept you? What are the factors? Grades, your GPA, your SAT and ACT scores, your extracurricular activities, and your admissions essay, right? So most of these things are things that like grades or SAT scores, like they're things that like they don't actually show who you are at all. They are, like grades from one school mean a different thing from grades from another school, and kids who go to expensive private schools have so much more resources and like tutoring and counseling and stuff than students from public schools or schools from lower income neighborhoods where the students are just crammed into classes, and it's like, well, we just got to get them through the system, right? And so then you're saying, well, okay, maybe the SAT is better because SAT is kind of like it's a balance thing, right? But again, as I mentioned earlier, SATs are biased. That like these tests are biased against certain groups of people. Like they just, students like who should be at equal levels, they just do worse. And racists like to say, well, it's not racism, like it's racism in the test that makes them different. And the other thing is that if you have some financial support, you can also get tutored for these things. You can get tutored in SAT or ACT prep. And like, if you've got time and resources to get tutored in that, you'll do better. And so this is just shifting this, which means that like, if that's what you have, the thing that should then helps you differentiate yourself are things like your extracurricular activities. If you have time for extracurricular activities, if you have resources, counselors who can show you in your high school, here are the opportunities for extracurricular activities, and then also your essay, right? That's the only place that can demonstrate that you're different. And that means that like if you are a college admissions counselor and you've got like a gajillion students who apply, generally you're going to have to make some sort of cut because there's just no way that you can get through reading every single one of them, of these essays. You make cuts, and if those cuts are on grades or SAT scores, well then, what are you going to get, right? You're going to get a biased sample. And I think about biased samples a lot. I'm an astronomer. I think about statistics all the time and the types of samples of objects that we look at. And if the selection methods that we use are biased, we want to explore that bias so that we don't do that, so that the demographics of our populations of objects, galaxies or whatever, are representative. And right now, colleges aren't representative. You can look at the statistics and see that the number of kids who graduate 8th grade is different than the number of students who graduate high school, and worse for black students. And for the same thing when it comes to high school to getting into college, right? Like it's biased. In 1978, you may know, the Supreme Court ruled in Regents of University of California versus Bakke that universities can't use racial quotas in their admissions, but they're allowed to use affirmative action to accept marginalized students. And like, these sorts of cases come into the Supreme Court because white students, generally white students, will bring a court case in front saying that like, oh, you know what? I didn't get into college. I was deserving. And that they accepted someone else who was less deserving. This, by the way, this whole thing, racism. It's racism. That's racism. Academia, this is like my central thesis. I bolded this in my text. Academia is built on this insane fantasy called meritocracy, which is the idea that the people who get into college or get jobs at colleges are the people who have the most talent and deserve these opportunities. The problem is the metrics for selecting people at every level of this are biased against non-white men. So if your metrics by which you're judging meritocracy by saying, the people who are most deserving, look at them being so deserving, are biased against groups of people, are biased against black people, you're not going to get black people in those jobs even if they are actually, and they are, deserving. Because again, if we start from a pool of people around the world who love astronomy, who all have a drive to become an astronomer, and we slowly filter out all the people who are black, The filters are the problem. Black people want to get to college just as badly as white people. Black people deserve to go to college just as much as white people. Black people are just as talented, just as smart, just as intelligent as white people. In fact, having more diversity is beneficial for departments, and yet they're not. Any science that attempts to demonstrate anything otherwise is bullshit. Race science is bullshit. Admissions offices have to change their look for college candidates, because right now, their methods are producing classes that do not reflect the diversity in this country at all. And when I was rejected from college at a high school, I did not look at someone else look at the college and go, well, that means someone else less deserving got in. No. What I did was I looked at myself and said, I probably didn't demonstrate that I was ready for college when I was in high school. And I had the privileges to do so. I just wasn't good at demonstrating that, and I also was a little lazy. It took taking a year off to go and actually explore what I wanted and explore what I could do in the community and what I could do as a person to demonstrate that I belonged in college. So when I reapplied, I was more deserving. I was fine when I was rejected. I didn't go sue anybody, right? So I got very lucky that I was eventually accepted to Harvey Mudd College. But the thing is that I recognize, and I recognize now with any job that I have, that I'm very lucky to have that job because there's tons of other students who didn't get lucky and are just as deserving, but didn't have the same privileges, opportunities, didn't get the job. And generally, the reason why is most likely racism. I'm benefiting from the systematic racism throughout this process. So at Harvey Mudd, there was a bunch of smart people. They did do a pretty good job of also making sure that they got smart people based on the metrics, right? But as I've discovered, success isn't really super well correlated with intelligence as it was defined by college metrics, which is generated through test scores or prizes or whatever. I wasn't the smartest kid there. I would always look, the teachers would put up a bell curve of the scores, like where this is like the best score, and then like over here is like the middle of the class, and down here is like the worst score. And I was always happy with when I was in the, like, not in the bottom 25%, which, I mostly got through by being really annoying to my professors and always hanging out with them and always asking at every time opportunity for help on homework, help reviewing tests, help making sure I was ready. And so, like, mostly by virtue of that, not through my test scores, I demonstrated that I could, get the grades at Harvey Mudd. But at many colleges, especially larger colleges, Harvey Mudd is small. All the teachers have small classes, so you can get relationships with your teachers. Many big universities, and I've been a part of multiple large universities, that's not the case. You get taught by a TA, and there's like 40 people in the class, or 70 people in the class, and your teacher may or may not know your name. And so next thing you know, if you have problems in your class, or with the test or whatever, who cares? No one cares about, and that's really a bummer, because that means that, like, if you go to schools and you get into college, suddenly you might find yourself, not following, hey, not your issues and your teaching and learning is not addressed, right? And the next thing you know, you're falling behind. And then you're like, is this really the major for me? But it should be, because you still love the subject, right? And, also, it might be hard. I was lucky. I could go to my teachers. I'm a white guy, right? I just had all the unearned confidence in the world. I just go to my teachers and be like, oh man, I really don't understand this. And then they would help me, right? But if you are a black student, a woman, a trans student, you look at the professors ahead of you and you go, I don't really see anyone like me. I don't think they'll understand the issues that I have. I don't think they'll understand the things that I am dealing with right now. And in fact, they might even scoff at them or tell me that it's not worth it or it's not real. And how do I know that this? I'm not saying I'm not making this person up. I've read there in the last couple of weeks, black students have written in the Black and the Ivory hashtag on Twitter their stories about their experiences in academia, and it's harrowing. That whereas I felt I got all the support in the world, there are students who presumably at the exact same research institutions that I've been at got very different experiences because of who they are and their skin color, and that's supremely racist. So Harvey Mudd had a lack of diversity in the student body. I think it was full of white nerdy guys like me, but I think at the time when I was there was maybe 10 black students throughout all 4 years on campus, or maybe a little bit more, maybe 10 to 20. But they've done better. They routinely graduate maybe 30 or 40 black students a year, but that's still not enough compared with the diversity that I would expect in America. And I think that the support structures, as I was saying, that got me through, not just academically, but with socially, got me through Harvey Mudd, are just not there. If you're a black student, a Latino student, like, you just don't look around and see people like you and go, okay, we can bond and work together because we understand the same issues. Nikki is telling me, you're correct, a huge disconnect and no way to validate because of the lack of awareness. Exactly, right? Like, you just need to have someone who's like, I understand this. And there might be white allies, but they don't understand. I can say I understand. I don't understand. I do not understand. I had a very different experience. And so therefore, when I was in college, I had problems. It was hard, but I never felt the difficulty of someone who may have also been there. And then on top of everything felt like, actually, maybe the only reason I'm here is because I was a minority acceptance or something like that. I was a token. And to get through this gauntlet of things, I'll bring this up again, this idea of a gauntlet, to get through this gauntlet of things and then to think, well, the only reason I'm here is because, that's bullshit. That's racism. I will acknowledge that there are times, and I won't bring this up for, respect to the people who I talked about, and unfortunately these people have heard me tell this story a bunch, but I have had experience in colleges where my response made other minority students feel less than, because I was hurt for certain reasons and I was acting. And that is a racism that I had, that I learned from, and I still feel bad about, and I still, and I try to overcome when I work in colleges now. But it sucked. It's racism, right? It's not out and out racism. If you ask students, they don't say, I was out and out racist, but racism takes on nefarious forms. So as I'm saying this is not anecdotal. This whole thing is not, I'm not just this isn't just stories. There's entire reports and statistics and interviews made with black college students in science fields showing that the system as it is right now is broken. So I have links. I can throw this great team up task force thing. This is it's in the YouTube chat. Sorry, Instagram. But essentially what this is showing is it's this whole document where a bunch of black scientists and along with some white allies in the American Institute of Physics just interviewed black students at various colleges, at historically black colleges and predominantly white colleges, and just asked them, what's going on? Where do you get support? Where, what, and just made up plans of action for actually changing the way that astronomy and physics departments run to help better support black students. In 2014, the American Psychological Association published a study showing that black women, were actually more likely than white women to express interest in majoring in STEM fields than they were in college. Last week, Yale, I guess earlier this week, BuzzFeed News published an article about how a Yale professor was there's no systematic racism here. We had a black woman here in 1976. She experienced no racism. The reason there's no black women here is because black women don't want to be an astronomer. And that is racism. That's racist. And this is actual studies. This is the problem. Old white guys love data. And so you have to appeal to old white guy data. And here's data. Data shows black women are more likely than white women to want to major in astronomy and STEM fields. And the thing is that they're less likely to earn a degree in those fields. Why? Well, colleges have designed a model that has changed very little in hundreds of years since it's been in use, and it's not a good model. Things are changing, it's being addressed, but it's just not at a great pace. So during my time at Harvey Mudd, I was lucky enough to engage in astronomy research. It was the first time I was paid to be an astronomer. I studied clusters of stars with a Table Mountain telescope. And it's the foundation of being an astronomer. So what you do research all the time. So this was giving me it was giving me training in the thing that I would eventually do in data analysis and understanding data. And so I think that many colleges do encourage their students, especially over the summer, to conduct research to give them skills for their future careers. I was only able to do the research because the university had funding for it. And also an astronomer at the university had research projects for me to work on. If you're at a university without this type of focus, you have to hope that you can find some with funding at maybe a nearby university or something. And many people don't, right? And so you may then also have to apply for summer research positions, and those summer research positions are also incredibly competitive, and there's not a lot of spots, right? And they suffer very many of the same problems as college applications, in that the metrics by which trying to degrade these is not great. And some institutions have put money into programs that provide summer and bridge research funding and opportunities for black students, Latino students, minority students, women. And I think that's great, but it has to be done very carefully. And it's, again, very competitive because there's a demand for it. It's a demand. So after 4 years of college, I applied the next step on this restrictive career pathway. It becomes more and more restrictive as you go forward, which is graduate school. Graduate school, I could do another hour on graduate school. I will not. I'm halfway through this talk here. I could do an hour on graduate school. Graduate school, for those of you who don't know, is about 5, 6, 7 or more year program where you take specific classes in your subfield focus, and then you eventually work with an researcher or multiple researchers, astronomers at the university on a set of research projects that culminates in a PhD. Some people finish and get what's called a terminal master's after a couple of years, but often universities use terminal masters as a way to drive out students they think are unqualified. Essentially, it's a kind of a racist way of like getting rid of people where you're like, no, I don't think you're good for PhDs because of racism. Grad applications are expensive. Grad school admissions are also stupendously competitive, right? The University of Arizona gets hundreds of applications. They can only accept some 30. That's difficult. And so the metrics that they use to choose grad students are historically very similar to college admissions metrics. College grades and your college GPA. A CV or resume. So good luck developing a CV while you're in college. A statement of purpose or a statement of your research interests. And then scores from like a standardized test, not the SAT, but in this case the GRE, which is a crock of crap. Grad students also have to have letters of recommendation from professors. So providing, hopefully you have professors that you know well enough that know your research and know who you are that can write letters of recommendation that aren't just like a set of paragraphs like, you know, one of my letters of recommendation was from a physics professor who I had for a couple classes. I bet his letter, if I were to read it now, would sound like Kevin altogether was a student I had. And signed, blah, blah. So every one of these issues, these things that are used, these metrics, has issues for determining student aptitude. Like they're thought like this will be a really good way to get student aptitude and talent or merit, but they have biases, and professors have to spend a lot of time that they don't really want to spend sitting on admissions committees. And I think that there are professors who do like sitting on admissions committees, and good for them. But most professors, not super excited about sitting on admissions committees. And so what happens is they just use some easy metrics at the beginning to weed out the students, like the GRE scores or whatever. And like, GRE is bullshit. I did terribly on the GRE. I'm still doing research. My grades weren't great in college. I'm still doing research. Like, if you want a metric that determines if you're going to continue doing research, the GRE, this stupid test, is not it. And like, to be fair, many schools, UC Santa Cruz just announced it a couple days ago too, over the last few years, have dropped the use of the GRE test in admitting students. Good job, schools. Good job, schools. Hopefully more universities recognize that actually what you really need to do is change the full set of methods used to determine acceptance. And like, admissions cannot be just some like thing you put at professors being like, sorry, here's a punishment. You have to read through all these, these applications, because there are students that really want to go to grad school, that are deserving to go to grad school, who are currently not going to grad school. And the reason is because the way that you've set this up is broken. I should also say that I've read as well that black students will say outright to other black prospective students, don't go here, there are racists here. And so that is going to also stop students from even applying. If students go there and they don't see themselves reflected in the faculty, or reflected in the postdocs, or reflected in the grad students, they might not go there. You know why? Because again, similar to college, if you go to some place and it's just a bunch of white people and you are someone who is not a white person, it's just not going to feel comfortable in the same way that it would be if you were to go to a place and see the diversity and have people to talk to about issues that white people aren't going to understand. I was accepted to one grad program, so I went there. I went to UCLA. It's a competitive research school, great professors, access to great telescopes. I was very, very lucky to get a chance to go there. And in astronomy and in many of the sciences, this is something many people don't know also, graduate school is paid for by your own teaching, TAing, and research. That's a lot of work to pay for grad school. It's not a cheap thing. And so grad students aren't paid very well, and they're paid differently around the country, and in some places they're paid pretty well compared to where they live. I think the grad students here at the University of Arizona are paid pretty well because Tucson's fairly cheap. LA, they're not paid very well compared with how expensive it is. I had to really move far away from like to another part of Los Angeles where it was cheaper to live because of how expensive it was to live very close and how expensive it is to live in Los Angeles. And that's also a thing where suddenly you're at graduate school, you've been accepted, you may look around and not see yourself, but you're not paid very well then, and you're also being forced to do a bunch of teaching work. Like, that's tough, right? And in many ways, grad school is easier than college, but in most other ways, it's harder. You have to learn to do proper astronomy research, you have to learn to write papers, you have to learn to give talks, and these are difficult things. Black graduate students, marginalized graduate students, female graduate students, they report that they had all these stresses as well, but they were on top of the micro and macro aggressions that come from advisors, faculty members, these people who are in positions of power above them, right? Not just, like, if I move away from just racism, like, there's, in the last 10 years, and continuing, sexual assault claims and, like, sexual pressures and stuff, really bullshit things that happen at all levels. Man, Nikki, you are spilling some tea in the chat, and I really appreciate this. Really challenged decision on self-reflection versus great education. And either way, loss of identity or access to education, especially mixed-race children. Right? This is good. I appreciate the comments here. Thank you so much. And so the thing is that professors who believe in the myth of the meritocracy that put them in their position then feel it's okay to be outwardly racist to graduate students who they don't feel belong. And so you can read these things where black graduate students write about how, like, their professors said to their face, you're more like a master's student. I don't think you're ready for the PhD. Racism, right? You should definitely go look at the hashtag Black in the Ivory. It's incredible to read these stories because you're just like, you could understand how, if this is the tidal wave of racism that is like encroaching on black graduate students in academia right now, today, in 2020, why would black students want to go on and become astronomers? Like if white astronomers just made it that hard for them. Like, grad school classes are harder than college classes just because they are less people in general. My cohort, the people that I was accepted with, were 5 of us. 5 of us. So all of them were, 2 of them were women, 2 of them were men, and one of them was, 3 of them were men, and one of them was Latino. I think one of them was also from Eastern Europe, but nationality. But, like, that's 5 of us, right? And so if you have problems, and, like, if it gets clicky, things get real bad pretty quickly, right? And, like, at Stewart, it could be 10, it's a bigger department, and at some places, only 1 or 2 students are accepted. When I was at Dartmouth, they would accept, like, 1 student in a year. So your total number of grad students is, like, 6 astronomy grad students, right? And, like, this is just going to isolate students, man. This just, like having this, students can just feel like they're just on the moon, right? If they're the only, like, imagine being a black graduate student at Dartmouth, an Ivy League up in rural New Hampshire. Just, you may as well be, teaching on Mars or researching on Mars for how, like, far you have to go to find things that, like, maybe, like, speak to you as a black person. And so students then also, and grad students, start to compete. They start to look at other grad students to see how well they're doing and go like, am I writing as many papers? Am I getting the same fellowships? Am I getting the same telescope time? And in that case, if you're a person of color and if your advisors treated you like you don't belong and you look around and every person in your cohort is just like, I'm doing so well successfully, that just makes you, miserable. And, like, I was miserable in grad school. That's why I have white gray hair. This is all from grad school. And again, I just saw people like me all the time. Like, I didn't have any of the same pressures. So I think if you ask any graduate student, you'd find out most likely they're pretty miserable a lot of the time. I had an advisor who cared about me a lot. I love my advisor. She's the best. Didn't make me feel unworthy. And there's something that needs to be recognized by white faculty. Their own path to their job was very different than the path of students now. Even if they got their job 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it just keeps changing. And I'm saying that, so let me get to the point. I'm not saying grad school isn't stressful for white people. It is, as I just said. I'm saying that the stories shared by black folks about their experiences make my experiences seem super tame. There are stories of black students taking their complaints to the heads of the departments and then having the departments just ignore ignore it, or tell them they're overreacting, nothing gets done. Black students didn't leave grad school because of this garbage, and warn other students to not go there because of racism, and they're right to do it because they take their talents to other places where they're supported. I hope that they can. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. So I've been rambling for a while. In graduate school, the first years you take classes, like first couple of years, and if you have time, you can do some research. But then at most grad programs, the culmination of the classes is this big test called the comprehensive or a qualifying exam. Your quals, your comps, is what we call them, comps. For me, it was like a multi-hour oral exam in front of a bunch of professors to demonstrate that I understood astronomy, just all possible astronomy. At Arizona, it's a set of multi-day, long written exams. And they're tests to demonstrate that you've mastered astronomy. There's a lot of problems with these tests as well. And they also seem to drive out astronomers. I know multiple people who have demonstrated incredible success as a researcher, as an astronomer, and then failed the test and left academia. That's bad for a department. If your department is losing students because of a test that is fairly arbitrary, I don't think, ask graduate students. You are the smartest at random astronomy bullshit right before the test, and then you forget it all the day after the test. Those tests don't actually do anything. I can't sit here and derive the Saha equation for you because I wouldn't need to. But that's what they were like, oh, well, make sure you derive the Saha equation. And it's such an epidemic that grad schools around the country, including University of Arizona, have gone through great efforts to change this because grad students had to go and say, hey, this is bad. Students are failing. Students are leaving. That's bad for the department. And the department eventually is like, ugh. Remember, you got to think about astronomy departments as wanting, and science departments as wanting to do research because that's how they get their funding. And that's how they get their glory. And so anything that takes them away from that can be seen by many as like a burden. And so I think that changing it from asking students to pull arcane astronomy knowledge out of their heads under pressure should be changed to tests that allowed students to demonstrate their mastery of the material on their own terms. Essentially, how did they do the research? How did they understand the subject that they're working on? These are things that helps them as they're in their career down the line. And so after they take their tests, grad students focus on research until they produced a body of research that can be turned into a thesis. And then they defend that thesis to get their PhD. And how quickly this is done is dependent on a bajillion things, including the opportunities of mentorship afforded by your advisor, social and mental health of the department and of the university. I could not have gotten through grad school at all if it wasn't for years of one-on-one therapy and group therapy. If you're a grad student and you're not going to therapy, start going to therapy. It will change your life. It's the most important thing. Also, having support from things like other professors in terms of writing proposals and things. And whether or not you got telescope time matters. And if you got telescope time, did the weather permit it? Was there a global pandemic in the middle of this whole thing that changed the entire way in which you do research, right? Was the quality of the data you eventually got good enough to write papers on? This is, some of it's under your control, but much of it is not. And it depends on external factors. And if you throw racism into that, in terms of selecting these sorts of things, and in terms of supporting these things, then suddenly you may not be able to tolerate all this. Over the years you have to do this, right? Think of this gauntlet I laid out, and it is a gauntlet. Think of how Black astronomers, Latino astronomers, women astronomers, trans astronomers, marginalized astronomers must feel after surviving every step of this just to get a PhD. Just to get the honor of defending their research at a department which may have had zero people like them and very little support for them. Departments around this country, this is insane. Departments around this country, actual science departments in the year of our Lord 2020, are still yet to graduate a single Black student, Black woman, Black man. There are departments around this country that are about to graduate their first Black female PhD or Black astronomy PhD. Their first in 2020. If we go all the way back to the start, remember, the love and excitement, enthusiasm, and passion for astronomy is not a white thing. It's a human thing. Racism at every step of the way, white racism has made the pathway to demonstrating that passion and enthusiasm as a career into a nightmare. It's pushed out people who are deserving and talented. I got my PhD in 2012. I entered the job market for PhD astronomers. And the thing is that in like the 60s, 70s, even up to maybe early 80s, the job market for PhDs was you get a PhD and then you get a professorship. And like some people got professorships at really good universities, some got it at smaller universities, but generally you just get a professorship. There's not as many professorships as there are PhD scientists, and so universities have found kind of a loophole by finding funding to support a group of people called postdoctoral researchers, postdocs, and who do research for a lot less money, and it's not a permanent position or even a path to a permanent position, except in rare cases, and like you spend 2 or 3 or 4 years just doing research at an institution, maybe mentoring students as well, and building your CV as much as you can, so then you can apply to the scant few professor jobs that do open up each year around the country. After grad school, I applied to 30 postdocs and got one after another person turned down that position. I never mentioned it, but generally, with grad school applications, with postdoc applications, with applications to become a professor eventually, you don't get to choose generally. If there's not that many, if it's a buyer's market, you just put your name out there and apply to whatever you can and hopefully get one. And you just, like, the thing is that, and I've read this, black scientists, because they don't have the privileges of white scientists, because of racism, they look at departments and go, I can't apply there. That job seems perfect for me. But if I apply there and I get that job, I'm going to be miserable. I'm not going to, like, and so they have to winnow down. Like, again, I had to cast the widest possible net in the hopes, I guess it was the reverse of casting a wide net. I had to be the biggest possible fish or go to as many nets as possible in order to be caught. This is the bad metaphor. But I had to try and apply to a bunch of places. If I had to limit myself further because of racism, that would limit the opportunities I would potentially get as a postdoc, right? I got one. I went to Dartmouth, which is in New Hampshire, very tiny department I mentioned, where there weren't any female astronomy professors, much less professors of color. I did research, and after 3 years, my CV, I did research there. I loved the research I did there. I really loved the guy I worked with, Ryan Hickox, who was a great mentor. I really had a good time. But I really liked the grad students there. I liked living in New Hampshire. It was nice. I don't like snow very much. So after, but like the thing is that after 3 years of doing research there, writing papers and going to talks and stuff, giving colloquia, my CV wasn't up for a professorship. So I didn't stand a chance to apply for professorships. So I applied for a second set of postdocs, and then I got this job here at the University of Arizona. And the thing is that my job, I've been very lucky because after being here for 5 years, they promoted me to a professorship position, assistant research professor, but it's not tenure track, it's career track, which is slightly different. And so I kind of like snuck in a back door to professorship here. And many people do, right? Professor searches, after you go through many years of postdoc, they have similar problems to what I've outlined throughout. They're based on metrics that institutions have used for years, metrics that have resulted in white male faculty mostly. Metrics like number of papers, impact of those papers. Have the papers you've written been cited? Do you give talks? Do you get telescope time? Many institutions are now having you write diversity letters and letters showing how you want to impact diversity in the department, but who knows if they're used? Some universities say they are, some universities don't say they are. So, right? But the thing is that I'm not saying that like the lack of success I've had in faculty is because of, I'm not a good enough astronomer to become a tenured professor. I just know that. And I'm okay with that. But I'm not okay with the fact that black scientists and marginalized scientists who are talented and worthy have had racism preventing their success in getting these jobs, right? Like, that's just the way it is. There are no black astronomers in the faculty at the University of Arizona. There are no black graduate students or black postdocs. The system is failing them. University of Arizona is one of the biggest departments in the country, and that is the case. They have not graduated a black graduate student ever, as far back as I think they've looked at records. And like, I'm lucky that I have this job because I can talk to people and hopefully they'll listen, especially because I'm loud. And when everyone else can be silent in some sort of faculty meeting, I can yammer on and not worry. If I'm not worried about like whether or not I'm going to get tenure or whatever, I've like given up on that a long time ago. I can say things and not worry that people are going to go like, Kevin, you just can't, you're going to make some enemies in the department by saying this. And the thing is that actions need to be done and they can be done. And it's not like a thing where every department has to reinvent the wheel. There are actions that can be done that have been written by people who've studied this. I just posted that AIP diversity report. They've got a list of actions. They've got a questionnaire at the end of it that you can just like go through your department and answer this questionnaire, and it has doable actions, right? And so what I want right now is I want you to take from this the idea that your conception and the world's conception of what an astronomer is should be updated. Astronomers aren't just old white men looking through a telescope, maybe in a white lab coat with crazy beards and hair. I know I'm growing a crazy beard and I'm getting enough white hair. I recognize that I am also a person that, maybe you would think. But like the thing is that astronomers are black men and women, gay men and women, bi men and women, trans men, Latinos, queer folk, Pacific Islanders following their historical family traditions, right? People stand in awe of the universe everywhere, and we shouldn't be putting things in their way, especially racism. We shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be believing in this myth of meritocracy as like, the system works, it produces the best scientists. That's bullshit. We don't know who the best scientists are because we haven't done a good enough job fixing the biases that have plagued the way we've selected people through the entire history of doing this. So we have no idea who the best scientists are. Think of who we're missing. I am not saying this because I'm perfect in some beacon. I am also a person who, through microaggressions and macroaggressions, have made other people uncomfortable, especially people like that I like in other ways. And that sucks. But the thing is that what I want to do and what I hope that we can do as an astronomy community, and what I hope you can do, is start to explore what it would be like if we changed this system. If we changed the way in which we treated our black colleagues, our marginalized colleagues, to support them, to increase the diversity at places that sorely need that. And here's your action item, starting here, all right? I want you to follow Vanguard STEM on Instagram. Vanguard STEM is like a web series focusing on women of color in STEM. The videos are great. They're really fun to watch. You get to see some cool interviews with students. I'm going to put this, I'm putting these all in the YouTube. Where's Vanguard STEM? Here's their Instagram account. I'm putting these in YouTube. Sorry, Instagram. I don't have the ability. I don't want to type on my phone right here. Here's the other thing. I want you to listen to this podcast by Moya McTeer. It's called Exolore. She's like a scientist, but also she works on stories, and she works with scientists and stuff to tell stories about what life might be like on other planets, like extrasolar planets. Like, if this is an extrasolar planet with sulfuric acid rains, what would life be there? Go listen to that podcast. That's pretty cool, right? I want you to, so I'm going to put that in here. Here's the Exolore page. You can also support her on Patreon. I also want you to go watch Jedida Eisler's TED Talk. After I left, Dartmouth hired a black woman scientist, Jedida Eisler. She studies quasars. She studies a thing called blazars, a type of quasar. I study quasars. Jedida is awesome. She gives great TED Talks. She's a great person to follow on Twitter as well, and you should listen to her TED Talks because she is just as passionate as anybody, and she studies, that's the same exact thing in there. There we go. She's also just as passionate about quasars as I am, and she's more prolific than I am. So you go listen to her. And then there's this article that I think says what I tried to ramble on about like 1 quadrillion times more well than I said, by Chanda Prescott Weinstein, that you can find, and you can type this in right now, tinyurl.com/CPW anti-racist. I'm going to put that here. You can also Google, it's called Diversity is a Dangerous Setup. She posted it on Medium. It's a fantastic, beautiful article. It's kind of complex, but it's worth reading. And they're all linked on the YouTube page. So I want to finish here, and I appreciate everyone who followed and stayed in with me. This is really very nice for you to do this. I know this is rambling from a white guy, who gives a crap what we have to say right now. This is not our time to say things. But I have a platform where some people watch this, and this will be on YouTube, where hopefully this is like a set in stone thing that people of color can point to and say, you said this, now prove it from here on into eternity. Black Lives Matter, Black Scientists Matter. Tomorrow is Juneteenth, celebration of Black freedom. If you don't know what Juneteenth is, get your head out of a rock and look it up. It's an incredible celebration, an incredible holiday. America, astronomy around the world is better because of black people, because of marginalized communities, and we can do better for them. So if you have any questions, I'll finish there. Otherwise, if you have any questions, you should ask them. Otherwise, I'll finish there. I really appreciate you watching. This is fun. I'll try to, in my future astronomy things, focus on research from marginalized peoples when I discuss various topics in astronomy, as I do these things every other week. But I really thank you in the chat as well, Nikki, for your comments. They were really helpful. But otherwise, have a good day, everybody. This was fun. And I think Instagram's going to kick me off in just a second. So I'm going to end here, but it'll sit on Instagram for a while. Please be safe. Please wear masks in public. And please, please, please respect other people who are different from you, because that is how we become better as humans. Bye. Bye, Anna Banana. I'm going to end the stream here and here.